Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hugh Lane Gallery's virtual coffee conversation series. My name is Kimberly Griffith, and I'm an artist and art historian on the Hugh Lane Gallery's panel of artist guides and lectures, and I'm here today to talk to you about a painting by William Rothenstein called In the Spitalfields Synagogue. It's an oil-on canvas measuring about 75 by 95 centimeters, and it was acquired by Hugh Lane around 1905, having been presented to him by what is described as a body of friends. It was part of the original exhibition of the Municipal Gallery of Modern Art at Clonmel House on Harcourt Street, and it was painted by the artist in 1904 after an acquaintance suggested that he visit the synagogue in London's East End, as it might provide the artist with an interesting subject matter. William Rothenstein went on to paint a series of paintings of the community of the synagogue, which are widely regarded today to be a high point of the artist's career. As we will discuss, the success of these pictures, in addition to their technically superb quality, may also be due in part to Rothenstein's personal connection to Jewish culture. William Rothenstein was a figure who was often entranced by other cultures and ways of life, which we'll see as we discuss his artistic career. I'll go ahead and minimize myself now so that we can focus on the artworks that we're going to discuss. We can begin discussing William Rothenstein's early years by looking at an early work of Rothenstein's, a drawing titled Parting at Morning. William Rothenstein was born on 29th January 1872 in Bradford, West Yorkshire, England. His parents were immigrants of German and Jewish heritage who entered the country in the mid-19th century. Showing promise and interest in art from an early age, William Rothenstein studied at the Slade School of Art under Alphonse Legros from 1888 to 1889. After this, he studied at the Académie Julienne in Paris from 1889 to 1893. He made friends here with many of the most progressive writers and artists of the day, though personally he was wary of the aesthetics of post-impressionism, much like our gallery's founder, Hugh Lane. William Rothenstein did not consider, for example, post-impressionism to be a serious style, and he also referred to abstraction as a cardinal heresy. William Rothenstein destroyed much of his work from his time in Paris, but sketchbooks and the works that do remain show a loose impressionistic style which he later abandoned for a more realistic style, dictated by heavier and firmer lines. Parting at Morning is one of the most important surviving works from this time period, and also one of the only surviving works from this time period. Rothenstein was a 19-year-old student in Paris when he produced this painting, and we can see the influence of Impressionism in this portrait, though it is not overtly impressionistic in style. We can see similarities to the work of Toulouse-Lautrec here, the artist famous, of course, for painting the Parisian nightlife on Montmartre, whom William Rothenstein was also friends with. As well, we can see the influence of Puvis de Chavannes, whose art was in vogue in both Paris and England at this time, and specifically we can see the influence and the similarities between this work and Puvis de Chavannes' paintings of the poor. The model in this picture brought Rothenstein two paintings by Puvis de Chavannes, which she wanted to sell, but Rothenstein's allowance did not cover their costs, so another artist purchased them. However, he did make several pastel drawings of this model, saying, and this is a quote, "In appearance, this model recalled a phrase of Henry James's, 'The wanton was not without a certain cadaverous beauty.'" In 1892, Toulouse-Lautrec persuaded the dealer Père Thomas, who specialized in Impressionist paintings, to put on a show of works by Rothenstein and the artist Condor at 13 Rue Malesherbes. This drawing was included in that exhibition. It attracted some press attention at the time and was admired by both Whistler and Degas, who sent word that Rothenstein should call on him. At the exhibition, Rothenstein was also introduced to Camille Pissarro by Camille's son Lucien. So in a lot of ways, this period of Rothenstein's, and this work in particular, were the artist's foot in the door of the influential circles of artists and writers of the time. Following his studies at the Académie Julienne in Paris, William Rothenstein ultimately returned to England, and the period from 1894 to 1899 is known as the Chelsea period in reference to his body of work. During this time, he created a series called Oxford Characters, which is a series of lithographic portraits published in 1896 that established William Rothenstein's portrait practice, which was the most lucrative source of art-derived income for the artist throughout his career. So on the right-hand side of the screen here, we're looking at One example of a pencil drawing on paper, a pencil and chalk drawing on paper that the artist would have created around this time, and it's of Algernon Charles Swinburne, and it's an example of the pencil-based drawings that William Rothenstein became most known for, and it's sort of notable here that though he was successful as a portrait artist, most of his portraits were done in pencil rather than, for example, oils. On the right side of the screen, we see an example of the lithographs that Rothenstein became quite adept at creating, and this was a practice that he sustained throughout his career, again having been educated originally at the Slade School of Art by Alphonse Legros, whose lithographs we have a collection of in the gallery today. During the Chelsea period, and while he was creating his Oxford Characters series, William Rothenstein also became friends with Max Beerbohm at this time, as well as Walter Sickert and Oscar Wilde briefly before his infamous trial, as well as several other notable artists and writers. During this time, William Rothenstein also began to regularly contribute to art criticism publications, which we'll see became an important facet of his artistic career, especially later in life. So we'll talk about that aspect of his career more a little bit later. Over 200 of Rothenstein's portraits of famous people are in the collection of the National Portrait Gallery in London today. And again, establishing himself as a portrait artist in this way helped William Rothenstein to further sort of get his foot in the door in terms of the artistic society of the time, and it could have also led to his becoming a member of the New England Art Club, which we'll talk about next. Sorry, just to correct myself from my earlier slide there, I should have said he was a part of the New English Art Club, not the New England Art Club. So we're looking now at a couple of canvases from this period of time. The New English Art Club was a group of artists who promoted French painting in England, and it included artists like George Clausen, Philip Wilson Steer, Charles Conder, and William Orpin. In addition to this, William Rothenstein and the archaeologist John Fothergill founded the Carfax Gallery in 1899, perhaps prompted by William Rothenstein's burgeoning success and also his desire to want to support new and emerging artists whose work he really believed in. The Carfax Gallery exhibited works by artists like, again, Charles Conder, Philip Wilson Steer, Charles Ricketts, and Augustus John, and it also had the first exhibition of works by Rodin in England. And it was really William Rothenstein's friendship with Rodin that attributed to his growing popularity in London at the time. So on the right-hand side of the screen here, we're looking at William Rothenstein's painting The Doll's House, which is part of the Tate collection, and it's notable in that in 1900 it won the silver medal for this painting at the Exposition Universelle in Paris. We can see here the artist Augustus John and Rothenstein's wife Alice Newstubb, the actress known by the stage name Alice Kingsley, have posed here for the picture. William and Alice at this time had recently married and were honeymooning at a cottage in Vetou, where they were joined by Augustus John, William Orpin, Charles Conder, and William Rothenstein's younger brother Albert. This painting was posed on the staircase of the couple's cottage. The painting refers to the Ibsen play of the same name, The Doll's House. Rothenstein was a great admirer of Ibsen's writings, as he was introduced to them by Charles Conder, who was also, of course, a member of the New English Art Club. The painting on the left-hand side of the screen now is called The Butcher's Shop Under the Trees, and it was also painted during this honeymoon period at Vetou. It's also, I believe, yes, part of the Tate collection as well. Dedicated to their painting practice as they were, William Rothenstein and the group of artists who joined him at Vetou rose every morning at 7:30, drank a cup of chocolate, and worked until 11. This work is an example of the landscapes that Rothenstein became known for, especially during his time with the New English Art Club. It also shows his growing interest in depicting the unique facets of specific places and the people who inhabit them. So with that in mind, we'll turn our attention now to the painting that's the subject of this conversation, In the Spitalfields Synagogue. In the Spitalfields Synagogue is one of a series of paintings Rothenstein created following a visit to London's Machzik Hadath Synagogue in the East End, just off Brick Lane. After his initial visit to the synagogue, he rented a room nearby, which he kept for 3 years, where members of the synagogue sat for him, and he painted them in different scenes. And this is because it wouldn't have been allowed to paint or draw inside the synagogue due to the rules that governed the space at that time. In speaking of this experience and this time painting the members of the synagogue, William Rothenstein is quoted to have said, "It was the time of the Russian pogroms, and my heart went out to these men of a despised race, from which I too had sprung, though regarded as a stranger among them." So it's worth discussing now some of the nuances of William Rothenstein's heritage and his relationship to it at this stage before we get into discussing the details of the painting specifically in this time period for William Rothenstein. So going sort of backwards in history, after immigrating to England, William Rothenstein's father, Moritz Rothenstein, ultimately became a Unitarian in terms of religion, but he still remained a part of the cultural Jewish community. His mother, Bertha, however, continued to practice Orthodox Judaism. And we know this partially because the family prayer book, which would have been in Hebrew, only has Bertha Rothenstein's name stamped onto it. Also, once a synagogue was established in Bradford, where William Rothenstein was born and grew up, his mother Bertha insisted that the children attended major feast days, which they reportedly did not enjoy very much. One anecdote from Robert Spite's 1962 biography of William Rothenstein records an anecdote of a summer holiday that the family took to Scarborough, where William Rothenstein and his siblings met an evangelist preacher whom they were all taken with. So the story goes that during this trip, William Rothenstein was baptized and converted most of the household, aside from his parents, to the Christian religion. However, when he turned 13, William Rothenstein's mother insisted he be confirmed in the Jewish faith, as all young Jewish boys were meant to be. William Rothenstein refused, however, to learn the Hebrew words he was meant to speak, so the English translation, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one," was provided for him. However, William Rothenstein's faith in the Christian Trinity was so strong that the 13-year-old William fully believed that the Holy Spirit wouldn't allow him to say these words when it was his turn to approach the podium. He was momentarily encouraged in these beliefs by a shadow that he purportedly saw swaying in the tabernacle as he waited to be called up, but as it happened, Christ did not appear, and so he went up and spoke the words before the rabbi and the congregation. This event, according to, again, his biographer Robert Spite from 1962, according to him, this event was formative in that it impressed upon William the power of religious impulse and the conviction that no one religious system was greater than another, according to Rothenstein. Spite writes, "Mystical intuition, like creative intuition, was a matter of individual genius. These winds blew where they listed." As an adult, William Rothenstein did not maintain any strong connections to Judaism or the Jewish community, having fully assimilated to English society from his upbringing in Bradford. However, William Rothenstein became familiar with the Machzik Hadas Synagogue in Spitalfields after consulting a Jewish solicitor friend who was the brother of his painter friend Solomon J. Solomon, who had asked William Rothenstein if he knew of it. Rothenstein didn't, but after visiting the synagogue, he became entranced by the atmosphere, producing a series of paintings on the subject rivaled only, according to critics, by those of Rembrandt. And this also would have been another reason, perhaps, why William Rothenstein was interested in portraying these subjects, in that he was a great admirer of Rembrandt and of the old masters, and so having a similar subject matter also would have likely appealed to him in some way. Rothenstein studied the people who entered the synagogue and created a series of 8 paintings in total. In describing the scene he witnessed inside the synagogue, William Rothenstein wrote of Jews draped in prayer shawls while in a dark paneled room sat old bearded men with strange side locks, bending over great books and rocking their bodies as they read. Others stood muttering Hebrew prayers, their faces enveloped from head to foot in black bordered shawls. Again, because drawing was not allowed in the synagogue due to their bylaws, Rothenstein rented a nearby room in Spittal Square, where he painted members of the synagogue's community, the majority of whom would have identified as Ashkenazi Jews, for the next 3 years. Most of the members of the synagogue were from Russia or Eastern Europe, where it is all too likely that countless members of their family and friends had been massacred in the pogroms. The pogroms occurred from 1881 to 1884. During this time, more than 200 anti-Jewish events happened in places including Kiev, Warsaw, and Odessa. So it's likely that a lot of members of the synagogue would have come to England and immigrated there due to religious and cultural persecution. And so this sort of very dramatic and extremely human and touching story, at least in some way, clearly struck William Rothenstein and inspired him to want to paint the things that he saw when he visited the synagogue. So when asked about his time painting the community of the Spitalfields Synagogue, William Rothenstein also said, "People have asked me why I have not painted a particular service or a scene in the synagogue. Those persons, I am afraid, do not understand my purpose. It is not the picturesque possibilities of talisism and the phylacteries that appeal to me. I have even left them out where I should have painted them. What appeals to me is the devotion of the Jew. It is that I have endeavored to put onto canvas, the spirit of Israel that animates the worshippers, not the outward trappings of ritual." In a positive review of Rothenstein's paintings, a leading critic of the time, Roger Fry, seemed to agree with this sentiment, stating, "Here, though everything was taken from modern life, it was taken from a hidden corner of London as unfamiliar to Mr. Rothenstein's spectators as if it belonged to the medieval ghetto." I think it's important to pause to take account of the language being used here by Robert Fry and recognize that though Mr. Fry was reviewing Rothenstein's paintings positively, there is a sense of othering of the Eastern European Jewish community that is evident here, especially in the comparison to the synagogue patrons and their community to that of a medieval ghetto, to use the critic's description. And a lot of critics from this time, though they reviewed the paintings favorably overall, there is this sense of othering of the patrons of the synagogue that I think it's just worth noting and talking about. Less problematically, Fry also points to William Rothenstein's great facility in creating dramatic scenes, which we saw earlier in the Doll's House painting that earned him acclaim. We can see this especially in Rothenstein's use of the chiaroscuro technique, both in the painting on the left side of the screen as well as in the pencil drawing on the right, titled "Three Jews Praying." The strong contrast between illuminated and shadowed areas of each composition heightens the drama of the scene, giving therefore a heightened sense of intrigue to what were most likely the normal rituals of the synagogue's patrons. Several of the paintings from the Spitalfields Synagogue series were exhibited in an exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery, which, according to one historian, argued in favor of assimilation. This exhibition happened in 1905, and it was significant as it came just 1 year after the Aliens Act of 1905, which was a bill created principally to stem the flow of Eastern European Jewish immigrants. Rothenstein's reaction to this act is unknown. However, we might guess that the title of one of his paintings, called "Aliens at Prayer," serves as his response as a pictorial appeal on behalf of Jewish dignity. So he's certainly trying to, in these paintings and drawings, trying to give to provide a greater sense of humanity and humanism and perhaps even relatability to the subjects that he's depicting here, though he is depicting them in their traditional clothing and their tradition and in the environment of the synagogue, which would have been, of course, quite foreign to a lot of patrons or viewers that might have looked at the paintings. We could argue that in doing this, Rothenstein is endeavoring to give a sense of dignity to this community that has been so greatly persecuted thus far in history, and as we know, continuing throughout history. So let's look now at another painting from this series. This one is called "Jews Mourning in a Synagogue," and it's a later painting, painted in 1906 towards the end of Rothenstein's time painting the members of the Spitalfields Synagogue community, and this is part of the Tate collection. And so here, according to Roger Fry, William Rothenstein had found what he wanted to say, the particular view of life which he wanted to express, the effect of what is enduring, monumental, and resistant in common things, needed a clearer, more linear presentment of form, a greater purity and more intellectual appreciation of color than chiaroscuro allowed. Thereby he handicapped himself still more heavily and had come afresh to the struggle with the insignificant and banal. So that's a quote from Fry there, describing his opinion of this painting in the series of paintings of the patrons of the synagogue. As we can see plainly on this canvas, Rothenstein has returned to a more formal academic style here, abandoning the rather dramatic chiaroscuro treatment of lighting that heightens the drama of In the Spitalfields Synagogue. The overall effect, in my opinion, is a canvas that is more documentary and formal in its treatment of the subjects, losing some of the human appeal of the earlier canvases. However, acquisition of Jews Mourning in a Synagogue by the Tate Gallery received a considerable amount of publicity and established William Rothenstein as a senior artist in the English school. But it also put further strain on his relations with the New English Art Club, from which he was already becoming distanced. Though it is quite clear from both his paintings and his writing about the time he spent painting the synagogue series that William Rothenstein was passionate in learning about and depicting the lives of the synagogue's community, how much of a personal connection he had to this time remains somewhat unclear. What we do know is that this period and the years that followed it marked a gradual distancing from many of Rothenstein's former friends and colleagues. We get a sense of William Rothenstein's acknowledgement and feelings regarding this in a letter he wrote to Ellie von Hoffman on 28th December 1904, in which he pens, "I am only painting Jews all the time. This may be distasteful to you, dear Ellie, but our children are very clean and I shave 2 or 3 times a week." So we see him here connecting in some way, at least to the community he's painting, if not the Jewish faith overall. One friend, Max Birnbaum, ever ready to bring his sense of wry humor to the otherwise tense matters, made several caricatures of this period of William Rothenstein's, which we're currently looking at on the screen. So on the left here we have Max Birnbaum's A Quiet Morning in the Tate Gallery, created in 1907, in which we can see Jews mourning in a synagogue, which we were just speaking of, in the background. The inscription at the bottom of this work reads, "A quiet morning in the Tate Gallery, the curator trying to expound to one of the trustees the spiritual fineness of Mr. Rothenstein's Jews mourning in a synagogue." So we see here Birnbaum sort of poking fun at the reception that Rothenstein's painting had when it was acquired by the Tate Gallery and how popular it was. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have another caricature by Birnbaum, this time depicting Rothenstein himself, which is titled "Will as Might and Should Be." And this is sort of him referencing Rothenstein's, I suppose, his interest and his passion regarding the community of the synagogue that he was portraying in, of course, a comical matter. Another scholar, Samuel Shaw, writes in his dissertation on William Rothenstein's influence between the period of 1890 to 1910 called Equivocal Positions. He writes about Rothenstein's attitude towards Jewish culture, describing it as a mixture of ignorance and celebration, of simultaneous resistance to and acceptance of Jewish culture. In his description of his visits to the East End and painting members of the synagogue, William Rothenstein maintains an aloof and painterly manner, taking care to regard the experience as that of an artist who has encountered a new and intriguing subject, rather than giving any indication as to the personal significance to him of these events. 2 quotes that give nuance to Rothenstein's ideas about his relationship to Jewish culture that are given to us in Samuel Shaw's discussion of Rothenstein and his influence are as follows. Here's the first one, where Rothenstein is quoted to have said, "If anyone had told me a dozen years ago I should now regret having neglected Semitic ritual, I would have laughed at the notion." So this gives us sort of the sense that he's happy to have found this connection to his culture. However, the second quote reads as follows, "The Jews are servile, suspicious, secretive, and tragically attracted by the clink of coin, but they have a noble element in him." This could be read as perhaps exhibiting internalized anti-Semitism, or just a general ignorance in terms of sensitivity towards this community, which of course would have been very new to him. And even had Rothenstein a greater connection to his own Jewish heritage, this would have been a different sort of community than the Jewish community that he came from, being a person who was of German Jewish descent, whereas the community of the Spitalfields Synagogue was primarily Eastern European, or again, Ashkenazi Jewish people. Again, in his discussion of Rothenstein's relationship to his own Jewish heritage, Shaw writes, "It is as if his principal desire is to make a connection with the history, the traditions, and essential concept of the Jews, less so with the Jews themselves." During this time, however, Rothenstein did make friends with a lot of members of this community, and he had a brief stint as a member of the Jewish society called the Maccabeans, which consisted of a lot of prominent members of the community and people that had become friends of his, as well as a brief stint as on the Jewish Territorial Organization. However, he quickly resigned from this, as he wasn't ready to fight for the Zionist cause and wouldn't personally have known a lot himself about the territorial matters that they were discussing and fighting for. The members of the synagogue, for their part, however, were not familiar at all with Rothenstein, and at one point were worried that he was a missionary from a society for the conversion of the Jews. At another point, initially they were reluctant to let him paint pictures of them, as they were reportedly afraid that he would sell these pictures then to churches. But eventually they came around and embraced his depictions of them. They were overall supportive of his paintings as they shed light onto their rituals and ways of life, potentially, in their opinion, helping to humanize them rather than cast them as the other. A critic reviewing these paintings from the Jewish Chronicle at the time noted the deep sincerity of William Rothenstein's paintings, writing that those forceful yet restrained manifestations of the true Jewish spirit were captured. To add further nuance to this conversation, however, William Rothenstein himself said that the painter John Singer Sargent, who was a friend of his, quote-unquote, urged me to paint Jews as being at once the most interesting models and the most reliable patrons. So there is a sense and perhaps a bit of a question there that Shaw discusses as well in his dissertation as to what Rothenstein's initial intentions were. Suggesting that Jewish patrons could have been a motivating source in creating these paintings, though it is notable to state that this period was not, however, particularly lucrative for William Rothenstein. Though he had many friends, William Rothenstein was overall, in terms of his personality, a guarded person who mostly kept his innermost thoughts to himself. One quote by an art historian says that with him, the pursuit of painting, which remained, in spite of any contrary appearances, the sustaining passion of his life, was exercised in solitude instead of in society. So while a lot of artists at the time, and certainly Rothenstein at the beginning of his career, would have built their careers upon being a part of these art clubs and prominent schools at the time and new movements that were happening, William Rothenstein ultimately preferred to work on his artistic practice individually and independently. So though he started out being sort of associated with the New English Art Club and other groups, he ultimately ended his artistic career sort of refusing all labels and not really belonging to any one particular artistic school. His personality as a friend in relation to other artists was such that he both asked and gave a lot. He was sensitive and easily wounded and had trouble empathizing with others' points of view, and he couldn't let go of arguments once they arose. However, there is no record of him saying anything insulting about any of his peers. He is known to have been critical, though not callous, and also was not a jealous person. One anecdote that sort of describes these qualities to me is of William Rothenstein and his son John going to see an exhibition of works by his old friend Walter Sickert, who I mentioned earlier, whose later works Rothenstein was quite critical of. So this is sort of an anecdote related by his son John, who became an important art historian in his own right. And here John says that he sees his father talking to a woman by one of Sickert's paintings and saying, "That small study is absolutely enchanting, and it's delightful to be able to praise it. Certain of Walter's recent works have made it difficult for his old friends to look him in the face." John then speaks later to his father as they're leaving, asking him about what he was talking about to the woman and telling him he shouldn't say those things in public because you never know who they might get to. Then, as the conversation sort of moves forward, he asks his father who he was talking to anyways, and learns that Rothenstein was talking at that time to Walter Sickert's wife. So he sort of was not shy about his opinions and criticisms, though he wasn't callous. However, this still tended to rub people the wrong way, as we might imagine these things would. In his last letter from Walter Sickert to William Rothenstein that William Rothenstein kept, Sickert writes, it's talking about another time when Rothenstein would call upon him. He writes, this is Sickert writing here, "You must not understand my wish to be left alone here. You must not misunderstand, my wish to be left alone here. It has nothing personal to yourself. I have only a few hours of day here. I arrive tired. I want every minute for work, and when I am done, I want to leave the place altogether. I have to answer the door myself generally, which is 2 flights of stairs. So don't be a goose." And so this is a sort of Walter Sickert expressing exasperation with William Rothenstein, perhaps not respecting the artist's time in his studio, which would have likely to Sickert been sort of ironic in that William Rothenstein himself was known to be an artist who guarded his time quite quite fanatically almost, and was very serious about his time in the studio. So we just see during this period Rothenstein sort of becoming distant from his former peers and colleagues. He was, however, invited to join the Academy twice and was nominated by John Singer Sargent, who I mentioned earlier, though he did withdraw his name twice. So we see him again sort of wanting to independently focus on his artistic practice, and it was written that it was tempting to him, but ultimately he did wish to remain independent, though he was friendly with many of its members. Rothenstein was also associated with the Society of 12, which was a society of lithographers, draftsmen, and etchers and wood engravers around 1904. And 5 of the original 12 were also members of the New English Art Club. So he's still sort of maintaining these connections, at least as late as 1904. But William Rothenstein did ultimately leave this society as well after he nominated Pissarro to enter the society, but Pissarro didn't receive enough votes due to the fact that he wasn't of British nationality, though he was living in Britain at the time. And as a result of this, William Rothenstein, we can assume again quite passionately and driven by his passionate feelings about things, resigned due to this. It was also during this time that Rothenstein and his family moved sort of from the center of things in London out to the country into Hempstead, where Rothenstein enjoyed being somewhat removed from the hustle and bustle of London and having the ability to focus more on family life, perhaps. So the paintings that we're looking at right now are examples of his more interior and domestic scenes that he would have painted during this time when they were living in Hempstead. The painting on the left is Mother and Child, painted in 1903, which is also a part of the Tate collection. And on the right, we have a work that's part of the Hugh Lane Gallery's collection, Feeding the Chickens, which is a work of crayon on paper. These paintings are similar to Rothenstein's Synagogue series in that he endeavors to capture the elemental as opposed to the specific, while still taking care to record and depict objects of the interior. William Rothenstein painted several interior scenes and a great many paintings of his wife Alice with their children, who he clearly delighted in. To me, these works exhibit an intriguing intimacy and empathy, and are perhaps indicative of the artist reveling in the activities of his young and growing family. Alice Rothenstein, for her part, was extremely supportive of William Rothenstein until and beyond his death, taking his side in all of his admittedly many quarrels with his artist friends, as they would have been friends with her as well. Though at times their relationship was tense, as William Rothenstein, as we have seen, was prone to becoming lost in his frequently changing passions and interests, and often reluctant to verbalize his strong feelings to those he was closest to. Another example of these passions and things that he was morally passionate about can be seen in Rothenstein's feelings and his passion in being a official war artist for both World War I and World War II. So we're looking now at The Triumph of Democracy, which is also part of the Hugh Lane Gallery's collection. It's a 5-color planographic print or lithograph on paper. This is part of 6 lithographs in total, in the total of the series, which was part of a series of 10 works that Rothenstein created. William Rothenstein was an early advocate for the official war artist scheme, and during World War I, members of the Rothenstein family changed their name to Rutherston due to anti-German sentiment, though William Rothenstein himself refused to do this, even though people in Rothenstein's own village suspected him of being a German spy during this time. He was an official war artist for the war between 1917 and 1918, working close to the front, though his artistic portrayal of the war was critically regarded as not very successful. Critics said that William Rothenstein's nationalistic ideals and earnestness had a stifling effect on his artistic style. However, today William Rothenstein is perhaps best known for the artworks he created as a war artist, which is just one example of the artistic paradox that was a defining part of his career, which is to say that though his works were often well regarded critically by his peers in his time, he rarely made a sale, often having to rely on family money to support his own family. In this specific lithograph, democracy is shown personified as the female figure in white, having just been unchained by the man on the right. She rushes to embrace a small child, a symbol of hope, being carried from the trenches on the shoulders of a soldier. On the left, the figure of tyrant imperialism, as described by the studio in 1917, is dressed in German uniform and has been disarmed and is being handcuffed by a British soldier. So we see Rothenstein here utilizing binary contrasts of male and female, young and old, to get across his ideas about the war effort. It's not a realistic depiction of the war-torn landscape that would have been the reality, but rather shows a farmer peacefully plowing his field with a white horse in the background. And this is perhaps one of the reasons as to why these works of art that Rothenstein created during this period didn't receive positive critical acclaim. In the inscription at the bottom of the work here, we have written, "While democracy is unchained, tyranny is bound, and from the trenches is brought the hope of fruitful service for all." As I mentioned earlier, Rothenstein was also an official war artist during World War II from the period of 1939 to 1941. During this time, he was passionate that the contributions of soldiers from India to the Allies be recorded. These paintings, however, that we're currently looking at, show William Rothenstein depicting the historic event from the 15th century, so much earlier, of Sir Thomas Roe, a representative of King James I, visiting India to establish diplomatic relations with the country. The finished work on the right belongs to the Parliamentary Art Collection of the United Kingdom and is one of 8 historically themed paintings that were unveiled in 1927, which still hang in St. Stephen's Hall in the Parliamentary Complex today. It's worth noting here that recently it was announced that this and other paintings in the Parliamentary Collection are being reviewed for their contemporary relevance in light of the Black Lives Matter movement and recent efforts to remove statues and symbols with links to racist colonial histories. In relation to this matter, a spokesperson from the UK's Parliament said, "The interpretation of artworks is constantly under review, and we will look at ways to contextualize the lives of those depicted." As part of this and a larger effort to bring diversity to the representation of both women and persons of color in Parliament and their artistic holdings, officials have stated that they are also reviewing the information that the UK Parliament provides online and in their public buildings to ensure appropriate context is given to this and other contested depictions of British colonialist history. As for himself, William Rothenstein visited India for the first time in 1910 and 1911, and again became fascinated by the culture, much in the same way that the culture of the Jewish patrons of Spitalfields Synagogue fascinated him. So for his part, Rothenstein really felt, I think, empathetically towards the culture that he visited and witnessed while in India, and the art styles that he experienced and saw during his travels in India would have influenced his artistic practice as well. And I think you can see that in these two works here in terms of the flattened sort of perspective as well as Rothenstein's use of color, although we do see him sort of relying again on this more academic style, especially in the more finished work on the right. Eventually, however, after the first decade of the 1900s, he abandoned his usual smoothness of the interior scenes as well as the more sort of academic style, and at least for a period of time favored a thicker impasto style, achieved with larger brushes that allowed him to play with the effects of light. And we can see that in this self-portrait here, especially in the treatment of the brushwork on his coat, on the sleeve of his coat here, as well as in the background. Switching gears, though, a little bit, I wanted to talk about William Rothenstein's contributions in an intellectual sense to the art world as well. He wrote several books, including English Portraits in 1898, Men and Memories in 1931, and Since 50 in 1935. He also made several philosophical lectures on art that he was admired for throughout his career. He was named a professor of civic art at Sheffield from 1917 to 1926, and became principal of the Royal College of Art from 1920 to 1935. During this time, Rothenstein encouraged emerging artists including Jacob Epstein, Paul Nash, and the sculptor Henry Moore, who is also represented in the gallery's collection. We wonder then if in this later period, due to Rothenstein's support of Henry Moore in particular, if in this later period of the artist's life he perhaps was beginning to warm to the ideas that moved beyond Impressionism and into abstraction, though that remains sort of up to debate and up to your own opinions. Mark Gertler, another young Jewish artist whom Rothenstein encouraged to apply for a scholarship to the Slade School when nobody else was supportive of him, Rothenstein wrote this to Mark Gertler when he was encouraging him that the great thing is to care very much for beautiful things and to carry a pencil and sketchbook about with you always and to live as much with nature as possible. So we see Rothenstein here really investing in artists of the younger generation and wanting to help to support them and to help them gain the education that he was able to gain himself as an artist. Also noteworthy, Rothenstein was a trustee of the Tate Gallery from 1927 to 1933. So having said all that, we might now return to the painting that was the topic of our conversation at first and give it one last look before we wrap things up here. So returning now to In the Spitalfields Synagogue, we'll sort of wrap up with the latter part of Rothenstein's life and a few kind of closing notes about him. He was knighted for his services to art in 1931, much as Hugh Lane was also knighted for his services to art. And along those lines, in support of Hugh Lane's project for a gallery of modern art, Rothenstein wrote to him, "I am perfectly willing to admit you to be a man of genius. That you have been able to make the most important collection of modern pictures, drawings, and sculpture that has yet to be brought together is nothing short of a miracle." So again, we see Rothenstein really invested in supporting the arts and patronage as well as emerging artists as well. Rothenstein received a retrospective exhibition for his artworks at the Leicester Galleries in 1938 and continued making art up until his death in 1945 in Far Orkridge, Gloucestershire, where he'd lived since 1912. The Tate Gallery put on a memorial exhibition of Rothenstein's works in 1950, and a recent exhibition of his work in 2015 at Bradford's Cartwright Hall, which again, Bradford is where he was born, was the first major exhibition of Rothenstein's work in the last 40 years. As Speight wrote in the 1962 biography of William Rothenstein that I mentioned earlier, he might be pessimistic about himself and his professional prospects. He might be tirelessly self-critical about his work, but he increasingly sought to make the world a better place than he found it. And I think that really sums up, though William Rothenstein had sort of varying passions and things that he was interested in, and though his relationships with other artists and writers and sort of important figures at the time may have gone up and down and been sort of volatile and varied significantly, he was at his heart committed to doing things and using his artwork to make the world a better place and to sort of shine light on different cultures that he himself became familiar with and entranced by. So this concludes today's coffee conversation. I wanted to thank you all so much for tuning in. And if you're interested in learning more about the gallery's upcoming education programs, please do visit hughLane.ie/education. Thank you.